Hello and welcome back. My name is Eddie Jennings, and in this video I'm going to continue the discussion about Microsoft Open Value License Agreements. Near the end of the last video I talked about the possibility of having two license agreements happening at the same time, not started on the exact same date, but rather offset by a few months or so, and where that could make sense for your business versus just having the one Open Value license agreement. And also, as promised, it's a little bit easier to see this in action versus just being told about it. So I'm going to move over to the iPad and show you how two license agreements can work together as far as the timing of payments and the net value that you get out of software assurance. So I have a couple little graphics here that are showing January through December for 3 years, 2019, 2020, 2021, and then July through June, starting in 2019. So that splits 2019 to 2020, 2020 to 2021, and 2021 to 2022. And the idea here is I'm going to show you how it could make sense to have two different license agreements kind of going on at the same time for some of the same licenses. Now, it doesn't have to be the same licenses, but you'll see the idea as I go, and you'll also see why it's a little bit easier to see it versus just me talking to you about it. So let's say in January we buy 5 licenses of our thing, and we're staying with the idea of $600 total cost of a license, and that software assurance for that is $50 per license per year. So January 2019, we have paid 600 times 5 is going to be, not 600, excuse me, 200 times 5, because remember this is going to be split into 3 payments. So 200, 3 equal payments. So 200 times 5 is 1,000. And then for software assurance, 50 times 5 is not 50. I can do math, I promise you. Is 250. And so in January 2019, we're going to spend $1,250. Now, let's say we get to July, so about mid-year, and we see that we need to buy another large chunk of licenses. And let's say we need to buy 5 again. So rather than adding that to Agreement A, let's say that we decide to make a new agreement starting in July 2019. I'm going to do this in red here. Now, we're going to assume that the license and software assurance cost is the same. Sometimes it can change depending on when in the year that you purchase a license. But for these examples, we're going to assume that it's staying the same for any agreement that we have. So we get to July 2019. And we're going to pay the same. 5 licenses, software assurance, $1,250. So now, if we don't buy anything else, basically what will happen is twice a year we will have a payment for $1,250. One's going to be due in January, the other is going to be due in July, and this will continue on through 2022. And then at that point, all of your licenses will be paid off in January of 2021, half your licenses will be paid off, and then in July of 2021, the other half of your licenses will be paid off, and then at each point, you'll decide if you want to keep software assurance. But let's say, so we had the big spend in July. Let me add that 5 licenses here. But let's say we need to add some piecemeal licenses. And so this is where some of the, advantage of having 2 license agreements might be able to come in. So let's say we get to September of 2020. I'm going to do this in green here. And in September of 2020, we need to buy 2 more licenses of our thing. Or actually, no, not in 2020. Let's say September of 2019. We need to buy 2 more licenses of our widget. So the question becomes, which agreement do we put these on? If you were to put them on Agreement A, so right here about where September is, we buy 2 more licenses. What's going to happen is September 2019, we are going to, let me do this in black, that'll make that a little bit clearer. So September 2019, we buy 2 licenses. That will be $400, and then $100 for software assurance, so that will be $500 that we pay in September. So then in 2020, what you'll be paying is $1,000 for the first 5 licenses, because that's payment 2. You'll be paying $400 for the second license, the other 2 that we added. So because that's now payment 2 for those licenses. Even though we bought them in September, payment 2 is going to be due in January. Then we have software assurance for now 7 licenses. So 7 times 50 is going to be $350. So now we are spending, or the payment that is due in January 2020 is going to be $1,750. So also something to consider is the software assurance for these 2 licenses we purchased in September really only covers us through December, and that's it. So $50 for about 3 months of software assurance. Now let's go back and see how this would look differently if we purchased these licenses on Agreement B, since Agreement B had just started a few months earlier in July. So we would have our 2 licenses here. So what would happen is for Agreement B in September, we'd pay the same amount. We would be paying $400 because 2 licenses times 200, and then 50 times 2 is 100 for the software assurance. So that would be $400 due in September of 2019. So what happens when 2020 rolls around? January of 2020. What you now are going to be paying is $1,250. Because for Agreement A, we still only have 5 licenses. So that'll be license plus software assurance. When July of 2020 rolls around, you'll have 7 licenses on this agreement because we added 2 in September. So this will be 7 times 200, which will be $1,400. And then we'll have 7 software assurances, so that'll be $350. So we now have $1,750 for July. So the difference being, if we had added them on Agreement A in September, we'll pay $400 for them, and then in January we'll pay $1,750. Because that'll be when payment 2 is due. If we add them to Agreement B, we'll still pay $400 in September because you're going to buy the license and software assurance. But January will be $1,250, and then what would be the second payment is pushed out to July of $1,750. And also what you get out of that as far as software assurance is concerned, whereas in this example, if you have the software assurance here, you're paying $50 for the software assurance that goes all the way through June of 2020, rather than software assurance that goes through September to December of 2019. Now, the overall cost is not really the only cost savings, so to speak, with this is the fact that you get more for your money for software assurance. Having 2 different plans is not going to change the cost of the licenses. Generally, it's still going to be split over the course of 3 years or 2 years or 1 year, depending on where you buy it in your agreement. But you get a little bit more out of software assurance. And the other thing, depending on how your cash flow and such is, it might be easier for your business in this example to pay, I'm going to change colors to orange now, to pay $12.50 January 2019, then $400 in September 2019, $12.50 January 2020, and then $17.50 July 2020, versus doing, I'm going to do this in purple, versus doing $12.50 January 2019, $400 in September, $17.50 January 2020, because remember, even though we bought them in September, on agreement A, that's going to be due January 2020, and then agreement B, you would have $12.50 in July, because those 2 extra licenses were not added to agreement A, they were added to agreement B. So in the end, the total is going to be the same. You're going to pay for your licenses, but depending on how your cash flow and such is, it might make sense to offset some of those. The problem is just complexity and keeping up with it. So you have to ask yourself, is the complexity worth it? But what I wanted to do was show you an example of how having 2 different agreements can work together as far as maximizing what you get out of your software assurance and possibly shifting exactly when purchase points hit with your budget for your licenses. So as you can see, when you have 2 agreements, it can be pretty complex as far as like timing of payments and such, but that complexity might make sense for your business. I'm not telling you to go one way or another between having a single open value license agreement or multiple open value license agreements. It really depends on what makes sense for your business. For the one instance I was in where I had 2 that were roughly about 6 months apart, it made sense for us to do that. And so the big takeaway is with open value licensing, I was about to say open value subscription, but with open value licensing, what you need to do as the IT professional is run the numbers. Get you a spreadsheet, look at projected costs over the course of your open value agreement. If this is a particular product that you've used a good bit in the past, or if it's a product that's the number of licenses are dependent on the number of users that you have in the company, you might have some historical data to where you can see, in the course of a year we might add X number of users, and you can project that. It can seem a bit intimidating, but it really isn't if you just take the time to sit down, run some numbers, and understand how the pricing and such works as you're buying stuff in different years of your open value agreements. It'll show you if it makes sense to have more than one, or what makes the most sense for your business. If you found this useful, and I hope you did, make sure you click like on the video. Also, feel free to leave questions and comments and such. I'll answer to the best of my ability about open value licenses, and also make sure you subscribe to the channel so that way when new content comes available, you'll be the first to know about it. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you the next time.